Zilber. He's a journalist and adjunct fellow at the Washington Institute, joining us live now from Tel Aviv. Neri, always good to speak to you. Thanks for joining us. Now, you wrote that Biden has closer political ties to current Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid, who you describe as moderate with, quote, an aversion to extremes. So how does that affect how discussions will go between these two leaders over the next few days?
Well, it's quite interesting. Lapid and Biden don't actually have a historical track record in politics, but they're quite close in terms of their ideology and their political positions in both respective countries. They run as centrists, they run as pragmatic moderates, and they really viewed themselves in the past year or two as being the final, I'd say, hurdle or barrier to right-wing national populists as embodied by Donald Trump in America and Bibi Netanyahu in Israel. And in both cases, both Biden and Lapid actually won their respective elections, and so that's the real reason why they're now in power. The question to my mind, and part of the article that I wrote that came out earlier today, is it's one thing to campaign and win. It's quite another thing to govern. Biden has been in office now for a year and a half. Obviously, his poll numbers are going downward. Lapid has been in office now as prime minister for 2 weeks. It's an open question how he governs.
And of course, Israel goes to elections again at the beginning of November. When it comes to the issue of Israel and Palestine, Joe Biden is a supporter of the two-state solution. I believe so is Yair Lapid. Do you expect any progress to be made on this issue during the visit, or is that far too hopeful to think of right now?
Unfortunately, it's far too hopeful, and it's interesting that President Biden, in his remarks earlier today after landing, said he was still a supporter of the two-state solution, but that it wouldn't happen, I think he said, in the near future. So even the U.S. president, in open public remarks, in a speech, said that we need to temper our hopes with regard to any real political breakthrough or even a renewal of the peace process here in Israel and Palestine. Having said that, we do expect some small measures with regard to helping the Palestinian economy, and helping the Palestinian health system in East Jerusalem, and these types of, I think, economic and civilian measures that the U.S. is pushing for and that the Israeli government under Lapid has agreed to. Not game changers in terms of the politics, and definitely not a game changer in terms of the overall conflict, but the hope is that it improves the lives of Palestinians here on the ground until the political process can actually get renewed.
Yeah, and Neri, I just want you to stay with us, but we are looking at live pictures, it seems, at the moment of U.S. President Joe Biden and Yair Lapid. These are coming to us from West Jerusalem. And of course, this is a significant visit for Joe Biden, his first as U.S. president. He, of course, has been to this region many times as part of U.S. diplomacy efforts. And we'd be amiss not to mention the fact that a huge part of this visit is taking place over the next few days when Biden heads to Saudi Arabia. How will his interaction with Israeli and Palestinian leaders influence discussions with Saudi Arabia's leaders?
Arguably, the Saudi leg of this trip is more important than the Israel-Palestine leg of this trip. Ought to say as somebody sitting in Tel Aviv, but it is true, and that hasn't always been the case in terms of U.S. diplomacy and foreign policy priorities. Obviously, the big shift over the past few months has been the war in Ukraine and escalating oil and gasoline prices and the overall economic mood in America. So Biden is flying to Saudi Arabia to repair that relationship with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in the hope that Saudi can pump more oil and get the price of gasoline down. What Israel and the Palestinians can do, we're already seeing it here in recent days. Israel has been in both private briefings and publicly very clear in terms of the value of Saudi Arabia to overall regional stability, regional peace, and the importance of Saudi Arabia to U.S. national interests. So it's almost like an Israeli PR campaign on behalf of MBS. And in terms of the Palestinians, the hope is that at least some progress is made in the coming days with Biden here on the ground to at least prod Saudi Arabia and other Arab states to further normalize relations with Israel and to kind of develop and progress in this overall regional normalization process, despite the fact that no real breakthrough is expected on Palestinian peace or Palestinian statehood. That's the hope.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting few days. Neri Zilber, thanks for speaking to us.